to my welcome in just a moment, but two or three things at the outset. Please note this meeting is being live streamed. Please let me or the Democracy Advisor, Sean Johnson here, know if you intend to leave the meeting. Morning tea will be at 10:30 a.m. We will stand for the opening Karakia now, and then I will continue my welcome. All right.
Tāku te hao ki te uru, whakataka te hao ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, e tira, i hauhu, e Māori ora.
Thank you. Early last evening, I made some notes in regard to this meeting, and I wrote down this is our first live regulatory processes meeting since March. Our most recent regs meeting was 9 weeks ago in June, and it took 12 minutes from the start to finish, and that was by Zoom, and that was before we had the Prime Minister's announcement later last evening. So we do have a few councillors who are joining us by Zoom. So welcome to Councillor Jenny Condi, to Councillor Rebecca Matthews, and I see we have Iona, Councillor Pennant and Councillor Foon up there. So welcome to all of you. And officially, we are in alert level 2 from midday, but we're already doing pretend handshakes. So welcome along, everyone. We have quite a few items on our agenda. We will be starting with, well, apologies. Mayor Foster, who isn't here yet, will be leaving early. So I move that we accept the apology from Mayor Foster for early departure. Seconder, please.
Can I just note that Mayor Foster's asked if he can have the link for the Zoom link.
Right, okay. I think that has been sent through, has it?
Should have been.
Yeah. Okay, we have moved them. Right. Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Please vote accordingly.
Ask the ones on Zoom to say their vote, and then we can...
The ones on Zoom, can you put your hand up to indicate if you are in favour, please? Yep, thank you. Right, that motion has been... I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to any items on the agenda. Okay, I move the motion that the Regulatory Processes Committee approves the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of June. They be taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Seconder, please. Councillor O'Neill, thank you. Motion has been moved and seconded. Please vote on that. Thank you, that has been carried. There are no items not on the agenda. We have a number of public participants this morning. We'll call you to the table individually. Welcome along. You have an allocated speaking time of 10 minutes and need to allow time for questions within that if you do want to have any questions from councillors. So first of all, we have David Greer. Welcome to the table, David. If you just come to the end of the table here, press the button to turn the microphone on. Yep. And David is speaking to us on the postponement of development contributions for 15 Alexandra Road, Roseneath. Over to you, David. You have 10 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I've renovated my home recently, and it's been approved and consented, and I've to pay, of course, a development contribution. What I'm hoping that the council will consider is that can be postponed for hopefully up to 12 months, given my industry that I work in, the events industry, and we've been pretty heavily hit by COVID. And if there's any way I can defer the payment, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, nice and succinct. Do we have questions from councillors? Because I have 2 or 3, but... Okay, Dave, apparently as I understand, the building consent was applied for in 2016. When did you first become aware that you would be liable for development contributions?
Only a few months ago. I'm not sure why in 2016 I wasn't made aware of that, but you just recently.
The renovations have been completed?
Yes.
Right. Okay. You need to, the report says you need to be able to provide a code of compliance certificate to your insurance company before comprehensive insurance is granted. Has it been, we're talking about January this year when you applied for that certificate, as I understand it. Has it been adequately insured since that time, or what's the story in terms of the insurance?
No, it's not, because they need to see the compliance certificate to give me full insurance. So I've been in a pretty nervous situation given we live in Wellington.
Yes, sure. Right. Any other questions from councillors?
Well, I see that, in fact, unless I'm mistaken, that the officers are actually recommending approval of your request.
Yes, they are. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I take it you're happy about that.
I'm very happy about that. Yeah, they said I mightn't necessarily need to come in, but I don't know. I just felt I should.
Right.
Councillor Wolf.
Yeah, Dave. First of all, thank you very much for what you do for our entertainment industry.
It's a pleasure.
In respect of 12 months, do you see that there might be even a potential to extend that out further?
I guess it's anybody's guess, given yesterday's news. Yesterday I would have said that I can't imagine that to be the case at all, but I'd hope that I could make this payment before there's a vaccine, put it that way, and just through general endeavour and business. And it's a bit hard to answer that today. Sorry. I would hope so.
Yeah.
Certainly. It's the last thing to finish the whole job. So, just want to obviously move on. But if there's any breathing room until then, it will be very helpful.
I think you've seen the officer's recommendation.
I have indeed, yes.
I can tell you that what you do for Wellington in a quiet sort of way is quite remarkable.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that, I've certainly taken that into consideration.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate it so much.
Recommendation.
Thank you, Simon.
One last question. You are aware of what council has the authority to, how it has the authority to pursue things further if you're not, if you're not in a position to pay before the end of 12 months, so you're aware of?
Yes, I actually asked that question yesterday, and I was told basically that if I was to sell the house, I wouldn't be able to without having paid the amount of, which is, that's absolutely accept that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, we will appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. I'd like to welcome Graham Turley and Matt Hart to the table to speak to us on development contributions remission for 11 Granada Drive, Granada Village. And again, you're aware you have 10 minutes. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair, for allowing us to present. We wish to speak briefly as to a proposal that has been put forward by Council to grant remissions on water contributions. And in principle, we support that resolution, that proposal. We would like Council to adopt that. We would like to speak to a couple of matters that we believe may have been overlooked. In making the application for remission and self-assessment, we're not professionals. I'm more nervous than I'm showing. We haven't done this before. We took advice from senior law practitioners, property developers, colleagues in other parts of the country, and obviously we went by the council's development contributions policy. We were encouraged to see that the policy states that the onus is on the applicant, that's us, to show on the balance of probabilities that our case is valid. It doesn't ask us to prove beyond any dispute. It doesn't even ask for criminal level of proof beyond doubt, reasonable doubt. Balance of probabilities in the court of law, I believe, is a 51% balance. It also states that the assessment is against the most intensive non-residential use, which this is, being a church, likely to become established within 10 years from the date of application. We believe we've been held to a much higher standard, both in the levels of proof required and in the assessment target. We believe we've been held to the maximum theoretical situation that might occur, but almost certainly won't. Whereas what the policy says in very plain English language is that it's likely to become established, which would suggest a pattern and some reasonable degree of probability about the thing occurring. It also states that everything we submit must be considered, and we are disappointed that our original application, we're not aware that it has been presented to this meeting until we tabled it as part of our submission. We pointed out the somewhat unique character of this development. It's been done on a not-for-profit basis, using a lot of voluntary labour, to be used by a congregation who are themselves not-for-profit, who have been in Wellington for around about 170 years. So a long history, I believe, back to the very earliest boats that sailed in here. There were members of our church on them. We contribute to the community. We pay rates, we pay taxes, we employ people, we are employees. We contribute extensively to charities, free ambulance, rescue helicopter. We support fundraising events in the city, white ribbon, all those kind of events. So we're not freeloaders, we're not looking to be. But the commercial element is lacking from this development. It's been funded by couples, householders, pensioners, business people, just ordinary people who their faith is very important to them, and they've paid for this development. We made some specific self-assessments, including around reserves. When we attend church, we're dressed like I am today. Formally, we don't wear a tie. We wear dress shoes, dress trousers. We don't go to or from a reserve or a sports field. The use of the church has no connection whatsoever with reserves. We use them in our private capacity as members of the Wellington community, but we support that through our ordinary rates. We submitted that it wasn't fair to expect a small community, 340 people in Wellington, to pay specifically for the development of sports grounds related to building a church. We were completely knocked back on that with no response really as to why, just that you will pay for it. Roading, we submitted that we haven't placed any increased demand on the city's roads through transferring from one site to another. Council notes that the other building still exists. In fact, it doesn't. It's been bulldozed, and a high intensity residential housing unit has gone up in its place, which will have been assessed for its load on council reserves. We're as close as you can get physically to State Highway 1. We adjoin it. Our access to the church is off State Highway 1 through a short section of Westchester Drive, which was built to service the council landfill, I believe, in the mid-1990s. So that road itself is 25 years old. The Region J that we're in is only just, we're only just inside that boundary. And being a new suburb, it has one of the highest levels of roading contributions in the city. Our church doesn't actually use those roads. We access it using a short bit of Westchester Drive from State Highway 1, both in daily use and in an extensive, if we were filling the church up with a special function, people would be travelling from Horowhenua, Manawatu, Hutt, Warapa. They'd be coming through the state highway network. So we submitted that it wasn't really fair to levy 29 household equivalent units for those roads. Again, we weren't given any particular reason. We were just told in the response, which you have, I've tabled it in the documents, that you will pay. Water, we accept as different. It was a new property, but we don't believe 29 households is a fair amount. In our assessment, we referred to the fact that the property is metered, and we put forward some data that's showing that over a period of 631 days, because we've actually been in this property since 2016, we used an average of 215 litres a day, which is 0.28, 0.3 of one household. And that's a pattern of usage that now extends back 4 years. We took accurate data that was a blind test. People using the facility did not know we were recording. We measured attendance and we measured water consumption on 2 occasions that were significantly larger than normal. And we've put it in our submission. We've suggested that is a fair and valid way of calculating ahead of the time what a full hall could use in the way of water. We believe that's scientific. We believe it's valid. We believe it could be repeated by anyone. Council themselves could repeat it. So we were very disappointed just to be told in writing that you can't use a water meter to calculate water usage, to forecast it. I'm not trying to be difficult, but if you can't use a water meter to forecast water usage, then how does council itself come up with numbers for demands of new subdivision? Somewhere, somebody must have used a water meter, which is what we did.
So, Graham, you have 1 minute left if you want to allow any time for questions.
Sure. As I said, there's a lot at stake for us, and it's private individual money. We actually got told that the water consumption by council in one of our events could be 50,000 litres with 1,400 people on site for 4 hours. If you do the numbers, that's a toilet flushing every 2 seconds. That's 1,400 people going to the toilet 4 times in 4 hours while they're attending church. That's the level of data that we've been held accountable for. We don't believe it's realistic. We don't believe it's what the policy says. And we'd just like council to consider that when it considers later the approval that, as a pragmatic matter, we would like you to confirm. Thank you for your time.
We have run out of time, but I would just ask one question. You've made some very valid points there. Because of the amount of money involved, is it going to make any great difference to you if we were to postpone a decision on this for another month?
None whatsoever. We'd be very happy to allow council as much time as it needs to investigate it fully.
My initial view is that we probably need to, again, because of the amount of money involved, I haven't had a chance to read this. I have read all the other documentation, but I've not had a chance to read this, obviously, because I've been listening to what you've been saying, and I think I'd be more comfortable with looking at the possibility of postponing a decision, but we will discuss that later. Thank you, gentlemen.
You're not saying that you don't want to pay development contributions. You're saying that you're quite happy to pay, but fairly.
Absolutely. We're not freeloaders. We're happy to contribute.
Well, just one thing I will point out is that council, in terms of this policy, endeavours to be consistent across the city, and we do have people coming to us, and there are areas where people feel hard done by, but we've got to be consistent. That's what we will be discussing later too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, is Raywin Hales here? Welcome to the table, Raywin. CCS Disability Action on Traffic Resolution to do with, three of them. Okay, over to you.
One, I understand, has been deferred for some further information, and that's the one in Agra Crescent. So the other one is the mobility car park at Kurori, which is recommended that, we oppose the removal of that because of the number of permit holders that there are in the Kurori suburb. So thank you for the opportunity to come in this morning and just give you a little more information. So it would appear that we have some very different decision-making processes around the mobility car parks and some of these traffic resolutions. So there's one coming up, I think, in Balance Street next week, which is a proposal to shift the car park. So rather than remove it, it's being moved from one side of the road to almost the other, which is a really much better solution than the removal of a car park. So the one at Kurori is outside a supermarket. People with physical impairments do need to get to the supermarket to shop, and the recommendation that's on the table is for that car park to be shifted into the private space that's owned by the shops that use that space. So, and as you know, there's no law enforcement around mobility car parks in the private space, and there is on the road. So in keeping the public access to those shops where you have very high numbers of people with mobility parking permits, it would seem that there could be some consideration given to another option of shifting the car park to a better location. There is no doubt that there is traffic congestion with trucks and there's a health and safety issue there, but that would also be a health and safety issue for the people who use mobility car parks and the aged population of Kurori as well, who are also permit holders, find it difficult to manoeuvre in and around that type of traffic. So if there's any way that resolution could be reconsidered to put the car park in a slightly different area, I believe that the little shopping centre could easily sacrifice one regular space for a mobility park to go in somewhere else. So there was 297 permit holders in the suburb of Kurori. So I just want to ask for your consideration on not removing it and thinking about some consistency around the provision of car parks. The car park that was proposed to be removed at Agra Crescent has been installed at the request of a resident. Of course, anyone can ask for a mobility park to be installed, and when council put them in, that doesn't mean that it's reserved for one person only. It's a public space, unless it is reserved in the usual way with signage, which the one there is not. So, as I say, I understand that's been deferred for further information, but some consistency of practice when these issues arise that the mobility car parks are not in the correct space, would be a request from CCS Disability Action that would benefit all of the permit holders. We are losing many of the mobility car parks across the city, but the population need is increasing with our older population. So we do need to continue to advocate to have these spaces available in the public space for the people who need them. Otherwise, it contributes to isolation and unwellness and not healthy options, as people can't get out and do the tasks that they need to do in their ordinary lives. Thank you.
Councillor Wolf.
Yep. Can you just elaborate on what the most ideal time span is for mobility parking? I understand that mobility park there is an indefinite time spell. Is that correct?
I believe so. That is something that could be changed, I suppose. A council sets the time limits on the parks.
Would it be optimum to change it, say, to a 1 or 2 hour? Because one of the problems with that park is that there are mobility parkers that park on that all day. They go into town and they come home. So other mobility parkers aren't able to use it. It's something that in times gone by I brought up with officers, but I'm just interested to know what your take on the best possible time span would be, irrespective of whether it stays or whether we move or whatever we do.
I guess that we would like to see mobility parks with time limits on them. People do get additional time in regular car parks, which is certainly a big help. But if there is no time limit, then people will use them. If they have a permit and they work in that area, they'll use them to park during their work time. And so by having a time limit on it, 1 or 2 hours or shorter, if that's deemed to be appropriate in that space, then that's an advantage because it does turn it over and it does mean that more people are able to access it. So I guess the answer is yes, a time limit would be preferred.
So also, are you saying that you would prefer that park to be moved somewhere else rather than the status quo with a time limit on it?
For health and safety, I think some of the other submissions have definitely shown the trucks and the loading zone and the issues that arise, not only for people with mobility issues, but for the general public around safety when those massive trucks are using that space to load and unload during the day on the road. So it is a traffic congestion issue as well as a mobility parking issue. So ideally, I think that the relocation would be preferable.
Thank you. You've been very clear. It's great.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Councillor Matthews on Zoom.
Kia ora, Raywin. I can't even see you. You're so far away, but hello. I would like to thank you for the detailed work you've done here. It's been extremely helpful. And I just wanted to check in with you. Councillor Condi and I have been working on some amendments, which to the Kurori car park to make sure that a third mobility park is provided immediately, monitor and basically sort of gets the agreement from the mall and Countdown that mobility parks will be monitored and that they will be allowed to use the private park that is as a replacement, that anybody who needs to use it can use it. They don't have to be using, they can be using other businesses. So I just want to check in with you about those improvements, but also just to sort of hear from you about anything that we can do to improve information to mobility park holders. Is that message getting through when that someone, if they let us know that they can get a mobility park near their home, and that's something that we're very, very keen to accommodate wherever possible.
Yeah, good morning, Rebecca. I think that that mobility parking is a bit of an issue at the moment. The parking policy for council is still, the process is not completed. So there will be some further discussions, I'm sure, but I think the council is doing a good job. But we just don't have enough mobility parks in the areas where they're really needed. And we repeatedly hear that on the censored parks in the city that there's low occupancy, and I believe that this is because the parks are not in the places where people are really wanting to go, where closer to home in their home suburbs would be great to do whatever you can in terms of communication with residents, that that you're doing your bit to contribute to making the spaces readily available. So thank you.
Okay, there being no further questions, thank you very much for that, Raywin.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming in. I'd like to invite Alan Blake from Living Streets Aotearoa to the table. Welcome, Alan. You know the drill. I don't need to say anything. 10 minutes for you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Good morning, everybody, on our another COVID day. In my head, I thought that Councillor Sean Rush was going to be here, so I thought I'd start at the top of why traffic resolutions are important. Because the council's got all these policies that they, or the councillors in particular, make that set how Wellington is supposed to look and what our vision for Wellington is, including things like the Te Ata Kura, and also the parking policy, the new parking policy. And in those policies, there's the transport hierarchy, which puts pedestrians at the top. And so when we think about doing anything in the transport arena, then pedestrian matters should always come into account. And so that's why Living Streets looks at traffic resolutions all the time, because this is how the policy gets affected, taken into effect, made operational. And so, that's why we do this. And I'd just like to note before I start that some of the comments that we made didn't make it into the staff report, so if they could just be noted on the minutes. That there's some other comments here, please. Thank you. So I'll go over those anyway. And so one of the reasons that we focus on things like broken yellow lines is because we know that in real life, when car drivers see broken yellow lines, they often think that if you park on the inside of the broken yellow line, you're okay, even though anybody who can read the road rules know that that's not right. So that's why I make comments on broken yellow lines, because it's important that they go in the places that encourage people to park legally and not to park on the footpath, because pedestrians won't be able to use the footpath if they do that. And there's a lot of places around Wellington where this is what happens. And parking enforcement in suburban areas is quite difficult to get, and there's a whole lot of constraints around that. So that's why I've made comments on broken yellow lines. I'd just like to support what Raywin said about the mobility parks, and I defer to her expertise on that, but I was interested in the Rain Street loading zone one in Kurori, because I was a bit surprised that we're providing public parking for supermarkets loading and unloading. Most supermarkets load and unload on their own private bit of land, and that's then they can manage it properly. I was surprised to see that when they load and unload in this area, they block the footpath. I mean, that's hopefully they've got a permit for doing that. But I'm also pleased to see that the council and the supermarkets are working together to come up with some solution on that. So go you, and please make it accessible for people as well. So our Mount Victoria comments didn't get taken into the staff reports, but we're supporting those moves. But I particularly wanted to talk about the Bachelor Road proposal in Newlands, which is up on the display up there, which is it's a kind of plan of what the proposal was, which includes how they're going to accommodate the additional parking off the road. And I'd just like to point out that that shows that the footpath is being reduced to below minimum guideline standards, that there's a mountable curb, which means that people can just drive straight up onto the footpath without having to even slow down, which is dangerous, and other things like that. So this is outside a medical centre in Newlands. So presumably they would have people going there in wheelchairs. My reading of those plans says it's going to be a 1.5 metre wide footpath, which is below the minimum guideline standards. And so that's not enough space for a wheelchair and a pushchair, for instance, to pass each other. So I think it's a really poor look for a health facility that they are not encouraging people to easily access it or to be able to walk past it. And if you know Newlands at all, that road up the top, Stewart Drive, is one of the main drags through with the buses on it. There's and on this road, there's not very many. Well, I think there's no pedestrian crossings at all. So it's a difficult road to cross anyway. And it's in an area where there is a lot of parking already. So I think, and Living Streets would recommend that this traffic resolution goes back to the drawing board and you come up with a solution that maintains a good footpath access, supporting healthy walking, like all of the plans do, council plans support, and putting pedestrians at the top of that hierarchy, not parking before. So one of the issues that raised in the report was that there's been a development further along that road with more residential properties, and so what I would say is what was the thought when they put those residential properties in, and how people were going to access that place by vehicle, and how are they going to access it on foot, and this is not an appropriate response to a new development. So that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Any questions from councillors?
I'll just make one more point in that regard. Then the New Zealand Pedestrian Planning and Design Guide, which the council adopted in 2007, which is the guideline that says what this minimum footpath standard is, it's currently being revised, and the minimum footpath width will go up to 1.8 metres as a minimum everywhere. So on bigger, busier footpaths, it's wider. Yeah.
Did you have a question, Councillor Matthews, or were you just waving your hand?
No, I have a question.
Right.
Hi, Ellen. Nice to see you. Except you're very far away from me, but hello. I was wondering if you think that in the reporting that we do, the impact, whether that sort of really kind of describes what the impact is going to be on pedestrians. And I'm wondering if that's a change that we could make, because the impact seems to just sort of say things like car park removed, you know, and rather than thinking about that, also that effect on pedestrians.
Thanks. A good question. It's definitely one of the issues that we've raised frequently over many years, is that, you know, you're changing parking, so you're just looking at parking. So really we should be looking at the broader picture. And from my point of view, pedestrians should be in there, especially with all of these parking ones. If you looked at some of the traffic resolutions, the photo included, particularly where they're talking about moving broken yellow lines, it's got cars parked on the footpath already. So there is an issue. It's in that photo. You know, you don't need people to, like, you know, you shouldn't need people to come and have to say things like that. It should be part of the assessment, and I think it helps councillors particularly make good decisions. Yeah.
Councillor Free. Before you ask a question, so Councillor Condi, I have sent you an email. Would you care to have a look at that, please, because it's relevant to conversation that's coming up. Thank you. No, while I've got, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just on that topic, and I guess this conversation has piqued my interest a little bit. So we're talking about pedestrian impact, but I see on the table with the traffic resolution summary table, and I'm sure, Ellen, with your eye to detail, you've looked at this, but there is actually a column which does talk about pedestrian impact, but just very broadly, and whether there's been no change or it's been positive or negative. Are you saying that you don't think that is complete enough, or it doesn't take all the factors into consideration, or what is it? Because the staff are making some attempt there, so I'm just interested in your feedback on that.
We've definitely seen improvements, but I think it's not sufficient for some of this, and particularly that one on Bachelor Road where there's a clear negative impact on pedestrians.
So you think there are aspects that they're not considering sufficiently when they come to a no change impact, or even a positive impact, but they haven't necessarily considered everything you would consider?
Yep.
Okay, we can certainly discuss that a little bit when we get a chance with staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have Esther Watt here? Esther, welcome to the table. You have 5 minutes to speak to us on Alice Street, Mount Victoria.
Very much. I'm not sure whether you have a copy of the submission that the residents in the area affected by the bus stop provided in May 2019, but I have copies here if you don't have those. No? Here you go. That's the, that's fine. Thank you. So the history was that when the previous proposed traffic resolution was put before us, the residents of the houses that are covered by the current bus stop got together and put in this joint submission, which sets out the problems that arise from the current location, and then also some suggested proposals for an alternative location. And I guess we do appreciate that there's now what is proposed as the creation of a layover for the buses, which will mean that they don't arrive at quite the same time. But the primary submission and is that the location in itself is probably one of the least ideal locations that could be found on the street. And that doesn't seem to have been considered in great detail. We met with Councillor Pennant and Charles Kingsford shortly after the submission was provided, and were told that there'd be some design work looking at various other locations. We didn't hear anything back about that until 2 days ago, when I have received an email saying that certain other locations have been considered and the reasons why they've been rejected. In summary, the primary submission is that because of the fact that 8 properties currently exist where the bus stop sits, 4 of which have garages and driveways over which access is required particularly at these times of the day when people are trying to depart their properties to go to work or take children to school, it's hard to think of another part of the street where such disruption would be caused by having buses there. There has been ongoing issues with the bus drivers being quite rude and refusing to move their buses or allow access to properties. And there are safety issues that arise from the fact that because so many properties require access, the buses then have to move out into the middle of the street. They block the view of people trying to cross the road and create congestion. And what we had said in that original submission, and I would repeat it now, is that the extension of time to 7:30 in the morning of the bus stop means that all of those car parks along where the bus stop exists are essentially unusable by residents overnight because they need to move their cars prior to that time, and also, in addition, that the point made in the previous submission is that that extension feels disproportionate when there's space for a number of buses there. The ticket that is given to residents who are there 5 minutes after the bus stop begins its operation is $60, so it's quite a large sum. And I think it probably affects residents more than anybody else when they don't quite manage to run out the door to move their car. The email that I received about the consideration was indicated that what has been considered is moving the bus stop to Patterson Street. They said they didn't consider the suggestion of moving it to a different part of Alice Street, but this is because this simply shifts the concern in quotation marks. And there are other options that haven't been considered, are ones that were raised in the submission, including Austin Street, where the buses currently seem to stop, but nobody gets off, and there are no properties, or maybe one or two that exist there. And also other options that could be considered might be, for example, having the Wellington East students disembark in the Wellington College grounds and walk up past the Wellington College field, which is not really a dissimilar distance from Alice Street and means that they're off the road, or where the St Mark's buses currently drop off their students. And I would request on behalf of the submitters that those alternative locations be considered by the council. If it is decided not to shift the bus stop, then I'd submit that the current operation times should be maintained rather than extended for the reasons that we've set out in the submission, and also that the resolutions be reviewed in 6 months to see whether the current problems of congestion and the misuse of that area by the buses continues.
Anyone with a quick question? Because we have a few seconds left. No? Okay. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate your coming in.
Thank you.
We have the situation where a request for public participation was made just this morning, as I understand it, and our rules are that public participation requests need to be made by midday the day before, and this has arisen before, and we need to be consistent, and so the request was turned down. But I believe the gentleman or gentlemen are here, and I have the discretion to allow them to come to the table to answer questions. So do we have a Countdown representative or two here this morning?
Councillor Sparrow, the Countdown representative, is unable to make it this morning because of the COVID response and
right
at their shop. So she has apologised. She wouldn't like.
Okay, well, that sorts that out. Thank you. We'll move on to items on the agenda itself. So item 2.1, actually before we do that, if I don't do this now, I'll forget it. We have been emailed an apology from the Mayor for the meeting, so we will record it. Yep, okay. So he is not able to be here at all. Okay, item 2.1 on the agenda, postponement of the development contribution for 15 Alexandra Road. I'd like to invite the officers, Nicole Teta and Mark Pattermore, to the table to answer any questions from councillors. Do we have any questions? This is development contribution postponement for 15 Alexandra Road. Well, I have one question, and that is that the payment was, or the request for the development contribution was made in January of this year. How much time does a person have, or do people have, in which to pay it? Because more than 2 months, well, a good 2 months elapsed between then and when we went into lockdown.
Generally, we assess it when they apply. I think so. Can you hear me? Generally, we assess development contributions when they apply for their building consent. We then send them an estimate of what it's going to be, notifying them we will invoice it when they apply for the code of compliance. So it depends. We notify them as soon as possible. It's usually about 4 weeks after applying for a building consent. So they'll have as long. They have a lot of time. Unfortunately, some consents take ages and they forget that they've received a notification. I can't tell you when Mr. Greer received his. I haven't looked into that, but I can let you know.
So what you're saying is any given individual should be aware, or the information is provided to them, they will be liable eventually for a development contribution. So
That's correct.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, officers. My question is, the submitter spoke about specific zones of areas in which we try to apply the policy consistency. Could you just kind of break down the note of J zones? Does that make sense?
Sorry, just not understanding the question, sorry. The number of different types of things we charge for, the number of different categories of contributions.
Could you break those down and what assumptions are made based on forming this?
It's basically water, transport, reserves. We look at what we assume there's a growth assumption and where that's going to be. Then we do build our infrastructure to cope with that demand, and then we break it up, go, okay, in Newlands we expect so many new buildings, and we split up that cost for that. Okay. So we only charge for projects that are in the long-term plan.
Cool.
Councillor Wolf.
Yeah, you are recommending a postponement in this case.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, in the past, are there many precedents for postponement of development contributions?
I believe this is the first.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, there being no other questions, we have, just my comments on this, we have previously had the occasional request for a development contribution, and there do need to be exceptional circumstances before we agree to a mission, and most of the time, well, quite frankly, there aren't. On this occasion, we've been asked for a 12-month postponement. There have been exceptional circumstances on this occasion in the form of COVID-19, although I am now wondering whether, I'm asking the question, not expecting an answer, but whether if, I think the presenter indicated he wasn't aware of there going to be development contributions required of himself, although the information we've been given here is that someone is given that information, and this building consent dates back some considerable time. So a prudent individual, it's probably very easy for me to say this, but a prudent individual probably should have been thinking about that and working out how that money was going to be paid. But in the circumstances, COVID-19 has arisen. On that basis, I will move the motion, being the recommendations 1, 2, 3 in the officer's report. We can debate this issue if we wish. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Wolf, would you like to?
No, I think we've had it.
Okay, no debate on it. Therefore, the motion having been moved and seconded, we put it to the vote. Please vote accordingly. No, she's not part of the committee. The motion has been carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to development contribution remission for 11 Granada Drive. Do we have any questions for officers? Deputy Mayor Free.
Given that this has been obviously, you know, that they do feel hard done by, as the chair said, and given that, you know, there's been in the previous paper a suggestion that there could be a 12 months period of grace, would that be something that could be considered for 11 Granada Drive if we were to approve the reduced amount that's been discussed in the paper? Subject of a separate decision.
I think that's a matter for council, I suppose. I don't. In this instance, the applicant hasn't asked for a postponement of payment, but it's been more a question on the on what's being charged. So that hasn't been requested. So would suggest there's not exceptional circumstances to do that, given it hasn't been requested. But that's obviously a council decision. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed part of the question. What was your question?
Just about, given that clearly there's a feeling that this is quite a large amount for a church organisation, which it is, and given that the previous example of deferral for 12 months, would that be something that could be considered for the Grenada situation? But got the answer I was anticipating was that it hasn't actually been requested, so it's not part of what we're at the moment considering. But it was just a thought that has occurred to me, is whether it was a possibility.
Councillor Wolf.
Mark, do you believe, well, the gentleman put through quite a compelling argument for a reduction in their development contributions, and the chair suggested that perhaps we lay this on the table and discuss it over the next month as to how do you feel about that? Yeah,
that's no problem with us. I mean, there's no particular urgency from our perspective either. It can has taken a bit of time as we've worked through this with them, so there's no reason why, from our perspective, also why it couldn't be held over for a month. I suppose the key thing for us is just for council to articulate what questions you might have, and we can get the answers when we next bring it back to council, if council committee wishes to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that you weren't here previously when the consent was lodged 5 or 6 years ago, but are you aware of the difficulties that the church had at that time, and the fact that the previous mayor and myself had to get involved to resolve things? These guys have really been through the hoops, and I'm grateful for you to take that into consideration over the next month.
For sure, yes. Yes, I wasn't here 5 or 6 years ago. I've only been here under 3 years, but certainly I've had conversations with Graham and Matt and aware of some of the circumstances. They've advised me of some of that history. We always try and be compassionate and empathetic to people's circumstances. So we have worked through this, and we haven't always been in agreement as we walk through, and we're probably still not in complete agreement now, but we've certainly looked at it closely. We've looked at what the policy says. We've looked at where we might be able to have some discretion, and we've come to this conclusion today, which is a significant reduction what they otherwise might pay, and that's something that council can be, that we're comfortable in. Probably, we're broadly comfortable in recommending. It's probably a compromise, a pragmatic compromise on both perspectives. It's probably not exactly what we as council officers would like to see. It's clearly not obviously exactly what the church would like to see, but perhaps it's a pragmatic and reasonable compromise is what I would suggest, yeah.
Sean will.
So just for the committee to know, to lay an item on the table, somebody needs to move and second the item to get it onto the table to start with, and then to lay it on the table, 2 people who have not spoken already to the motion need to move and second a procedural motion to lay it on the table, and then that gets voted on. Yeah, so nobody's spoken to the motion yet. These are just questions. So.
Okay, well, I have various questions and various comments, but on the basis that I'm hoping we will be able to lay it on the table, I will leave those to a later stage when we can have a more comprehensive discussion. So at this stage, I move to get it on the table, I move the motion being the recommendations in the officer's report. Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor O'Neill. Right. Councillor Wolf, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I so move that we lay this item on the table.
Okay. Any?
We vote on
it.
Right. So we vote on that one first.
This vote, for those on Zoom, is voting to lay the item on the table.
Okay, please vote for that or against it.
It's for a month. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're good too.
Okay, thank you. We're laying it on the table and we will discuss it comprehensively within the next week or two. Yes, Mark?
Sure, I was just, I think you just answered my question. Yeah, if council committee could be clear about what you would like clarified and answered so we can come back with those answers next time when we come back to discuss it. So we've got the answers that you want, that'd be useful, yeah.
I think if we get together.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, that will include the opportunity to digest the report here from the people themselves.
Can I just say, it's no criticism of you guys.
No, of course not.
You know, like I, Mark in particular, I've enjoyed our interactions and I think that you're a very fair guy. So.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and we're just working through a process together. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. At this point, it's right on 10:30, so we will adjourn for 15 minutes. We'll back here. We'll start again promptly at 10:45. Thank you.
We were not quite at all. We both got involved.
Councillor Condi, did you hear any of that? I've handed over to you at this point to introduce traffic resolutions report.
Excellent. I didn't hear any of it, but I'm happy to have it handed over to me for the traffic resolutions report. Are we going to start with questions from officers before I move the motion?
Yes, that would, there may well be a number of questions for officers. We have them at the table. So Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, thank you. Touched on it just briefly over the break, but to reiterate as a part of this proposal and trying to find space for residents, that you're looking into residents' car parking on the other side of the road, is that correct?
That's correct. On the table today is also for residents. I think there's 3 spaces. So that's complementing the earlier start on Alice Street that we are also proposing.
Cool. And a secondary question: what do you think is the some of the health and safety risks leaving the bus stop as it is?
Which one was that? So the car parks that are currently parked in the bus stops, if they're there when the bus arrives, then it prevents the bus pulling in fully to the bus stop. So there are risks there with children alighting into the road carriageway, but also just the backup of traffic and congestion back to the intersection causes issues as well.
We have been emailed by Sean the amendments and such like. Actually, Councillor Conde, it might be useful for you to introduce the report at the moment, and you can outline the various changes and such like, and at that point we might have some intelligent questions for, well, Councillor O'Neill's question was obviously very intelligent, but we may have a better platform from which to ask our questions.
Sure thing. Thanks, Councillor. All right, so if you check your email, you've received these updates. So the first thing you'll see is that we've removed traffic resolution, which is recommendation P, Agra Crescent. So as discussed during question time, we're removing that to give officers a bit more time just to talk to the number of mobility permit holders who live in that area to see whether they still require that parking space or whether there's another location nearby that would be more convenient for them. So that if we are removing a park, we're hopefully putting one in at the same time. So we just want to do a bit more work to talk to those people. And then there's a number of additional recommendations here. Recommendation 3 is agreeing to defer that Agra Crescent decision to a future meeting. Recommendation 4 is noting that on Rain Street, so we've been talking a bit already about Rain Street and Kurori, where we will be extending the loading zone results in the removal of a mobility park, that officers will submit a traffic resolution for us in the October round of traffic resolutions that will put a new mobility park across the street on Rain Street. Number 5, noting that the changes on Rain Street will only be made once we've had a replacement mobility park approved, so the one on street, or if we get the following conditions agreed to by Countdown and the mall owners. And you can read those conditions there. So the mall owners have indicated that they will provide a 3rd mobility park. They've got 2 off-street mobility parks there at the moment. They've indicated that they will provide a 3rd one there. And those conditions are then that park is provided, that they're closely monitored to make sure that they aren't being abused, because we've heard from CCS that often private mobility parks are not as carefully enforced as we try to enforce our on-street ones. So making sure that they're properly available for those who need them. And also that we'll be a little bit flexible about allowing users who might be popping over to the Winds or another business nearby, that they can use those even if they're not in the mall. And then the final one is just noting that the operation of these 2 TRs that are about Alice Street, so this is the buses parking on Alice Street and the new layover space that's been provided on Kent Terrace, that those are going to be monitored. The operation of that will be monitored by staff, and they will update the portfolio leader, being me, after 6 months, so that we can just have a check-in and see where we're at with that, and if we need to make any changes. The hope with that is that we will actually, the Kent Terrace layover will work really successfully, and that we will therefore be able to extend the Kent Terrace layover and reduce the length of the bus stops that are on Alice Street. But we need to make sure and be confident that that's actually working appropriately before we do that. So that's what we're monitoring for in that case. So that's a quick rundown of the amendments that have come through this morning, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Condry. I do have a question, and that is in terms of the Mark Ave one, the Guadalupe Crescent TR 1420. One of the local residents has been sending through a number of emails, and a couple of the questions she was asking, I'm not sure that I have followed through on in terms of wanting an answer, and they are pulling out of Trinidad Crescent. She says, looking to the right, that is looking south along Mark Ave, where cars are sometimes parked, obscuring the view. Are we looking at the possibility of some yellow lines there? That's the first question. I'll let you comment on that.
In the officer's response, there were a number of bullet points that we put in, and one was to look at no stopping restrictions on Mark Avenue to improve the sight lines from Trinidad Crescent. So we've committed to looking at that.
Right, yep, okay, thank you. And the other one was her suggestion as to looking at the possibility of a roundabout there. So what are your comments on that?
So in the response, where we are currently the two side roads, Guadalupe and Trinidad, all they have is a continuity line across the throat of the exits. We are looking at the giveaway on Guadalupe and a stop on Trinidad, which is particularly restricted. So we are actually, this proposal will make it a lot safer. The only reported crash at this intersection is a car turning right out of Trinidad Crescent and being hit by a car travelling south on Mark Avenue. That's the only reported crash. I know her email mentioned a lot of other bits and pieces. So a roundabout isn't a solution we just jump straight in and do. You know, this is these low volume intersection roads where the actual control of the exits by stop and give way is the way we go about, you know, improving safety here.
It's fair enough. Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Yeah, hi guys. Bearing in mind what Raywin mentioned about the time limits for mobility parking, could we, with the leave of the meeting, suggest that the Rain Street, where it gets moved to, is 2 hours, and that in other cases in the future where we're dealing with mobility parking, that we can take that into account also, because mobility parkers also abuse their own system.
Yeah, happy to take that on board, and good to get that feedback. So we'll make sure that we're looking at restrictions as well whenever we put mobility parks on street. And
you're right with leave of the meeting, including that to Rain Street now?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Certainly, yeah.
So we can include that as part of Jenny's amendment. Is that all right with you, Jenny? Yeah, she's fine with that.
Deputy Mayor Free.
Yes, just in the matter of the Ellis Street traffic resolution, which I accept comes as sort of a package deal, so it needs to be kind of taken in conjunction with the additional recommendations for the parking overlay for the buses on Kent Terrace and some of the other things. But I'm just wondering if you would consider it appropriate if we were to move an amendment to ask you to look into whether there's options for more residents parking to compensate for those times when residents have to get up and move their car very early in the morning.
Yes, certainly we're promoting 3 at this point in time, but there are other opportunities along Alice and Austin we can certainly look at and bring back to a RPC soon.
So I have sent something along those lines to Sean, and I'll be looking for a seconder.
Malcolm, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Oh, Hi everyone. Sorry that I couldn't be here in person, but I've got a cold and you don't want me there. And look, I'm just here primarily for the Ellis Street one because I've been working for residents for a little while on this issue. So first of all, I'd just like to thank officers for coming up with this compromise solution. That is really appreciated, and the layover I'm sure will help. But I'm just wondering if really it wouldn't be possible to shorten those hours to the status quo, really that there is enough time for the buses to arrive safely. That would certainly help residents. And I guess would just like to hear a little bit more about whether some of the alternative places for parking the buses would work, particularly around Kent and Cambridge.
So the early start that we're promoting on Ellis Street in the morning is primarily to allow that bus stop through there to work. It's about 60 metres long. It can take 4 buses. The challenge we have with this morning arrival of buses, there's actually 11 buses arrive between 8:20 and 8:25. One arrives earlier at 8:15. Parking services with the current restriction at 8 a.m., if they ticket somebody at 8 a.m., it actually takes them about 45 minutes to be able to get the tow truck up to tow the car away. So straight away we're into that problematic time where there may be 1 car, 2 cars in that bus stop on Ellis Street and the buses can't get in, and so they are causing some health and safety concerns with stacking up and blocking the intersection of Ellis and Austin. There is an opportunities, and the buses do use the bus stops on Ellis to feed into that bus stop. On Austin, there are those 2 other bus stops, and the buses feed into Ellis when they see it's clear. But so it's quite problematic in terms of the kids getting, as Siobhan said earlier, they're getting off the buses and they're walking on the footpath, but some are also walking to school along Ellis, crossing along Austin, and they're crossing Ellis, walking up to the college. And so they're walking into a zone now where we've got buses straddling the intersection. There are actually cars moving on that section of road, not high volume, but there are obviously concerns with pedestrian safety. So the earlier start is actually helping to manage a current problem we have. We have looked at other locations for bus stops, and in our email to you on the 30th of June, identified looking at moving to Patterson Street or down on Brotham Street. Those were considered as not being valid in terms of footpath width when the children get off. Actually accessing through Ellis Street, through Austin Street, turning into Patterson is a tight right turn. We'd have to remove a lot of parking, and in fact the bus would be travelling on the wrong side of the road. It's a 2-way section of road, as you know, through Patterson and Austin. So it would be a bigger scheme there if we were to consider trying to get the buses closer to the school or into the school grounds, and actually making a number of our streets through there a 1-way network, which is quite a chunk of work.
And what about on Kent Terrace, like Wellington College students?
Yeah, quite a long way to walk down to Kent Terrace. The layover on Kent Terrace is primarily in the afternoon peak from 2 to 3:15. And we have worked with Greater Wellington, and they've used the bus stop across the road, and we've identified one. It actually works if the buses use a layover area and then feed up to Ellis Street. You actually see the number of buses on Ellis Street significantly reduced. So we have trialled what we're looking at.
Right. Okay. And just the last question, in terms of Jenny's amendment, would it be all right if we changed it to do consultation with the community as well as you know, just to check in with the community about how it's working, as well as talking to the portfolio leader.
In terms of the 6-month monitoring?
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks very much, staff.
Did you have a question, Deputy Mayor Free? Your hand go up. Okay. Back with you, Councillor Condi.
Hello. All right, so I'm quite happy to incorporate all of those suggested amendment changes into the substantive. So Sarah, if that's all right with you, I'm happy to just add your little amendment into the substantive as well.
Jenny, are you also happy to make it portfolio leads? Because in the matter of the buses, I would actually quite like to be kept in touch.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, I'm just looking at my list to see. I'm going to ask a couple of more questions of officers, and that will give Sean a bit of time to kind of figure out what's going on. And we may need to take a couple of minutes just so everyone can make sure they're happy with the wording before we move the motion. But before we do that, I still have a couple of questions. One, staff, can you just give us a bit more information about Bachelor Street, which Ellen Blake specifically came in to talk to us about today? And I was interested particularly in her comment about the mountable curb, that she's given us what the downsides of the mountable curb are. So I was just interested in why that mountable curb had been included in the design in the first place.
So on Bachelor Street, it's got a narrow road, parking on both sides. The lay-by parking is being promoted to, knowing the high demand for parking in the area with the community centre and the medical centre. The lay-by parking actually facilitates that demand. The road is particularly narrow as you travel up Bachelor Street towards Stewart Drive, and because you're travelling up and you're going around a slight curve to the left, you can't actually see traffic entering off Stewart Drive. So moving the parking over and creating a roadway for two-way travel is important. The footpath is 1.5 metres, reducing down for a very short section to 1.2. That is because we've got the road reserve boundary is very tight to our area of work there, and we have to put in a low retaining wall, which has taken up a little room. So the 1.5, I going from memory, I would think the footpath leading into the new slightly diverted footpath is 1.5 as well. It's on the other side of the shopping centre and the community centre, so I don't see it as being a extremely high demand footpath through there.
Thank you. And the mountable curb, why was the mountable curb included?
It does allow cars, yeah, I'd have to just double check. The plan is a little, the writing is a little slow. Yeah, it does actually facilitate cars to move in there and then square up and keep well clear of the footpath. I'd have to confirm if that's a mountable or a full height curb. In some cases where we put in lay-by parking, we do have a slightly less curb face to facilitate cars to ease in and ease out. Lay-by parking, it's not always as easy to park in as in straight parallel parking on the side of the road.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, I'd just be really keen to have the officers just tell us a bit more about the story behind Rain Street and what's happening at the Countdown in Kurori there, particularly because the manager of Countdown was going to join us today but hasn't been able to because plenty of people are out stocking up, feeling a bit nervous this morning. So she had her hands full with that. So if you could just give us a bit of background into that, actually health and safety concerns about how the loading zones are operating there at the moment and what's led us to this place to begin with. Yes,
certainly the loading, the current the loading is not only done by Countdown in the mall, it's done by the New World, and so it's busy. The current off-street loading zone is not really very usable because it's a dead end, and so they're actually using a short, I think it's a 16-metre loading zone on the road at the current time, which isn't actually long enough for them to track in with their larger vehicles and track out. So currently the health and safety concerns are with the trucks also occupying the mobility space at times, which makes the space inoperable. So they're infringing parking, our legal requirements for parking. Operationally, we're working with them in terms of temporary traffic management when they do use the loading space, and they're actually promoting temporary traffic management at all their Countdown stores in our Wellington area through our compliance officers at this current time. So we are working closely together with them. In terms of the conditions that are on the report, emailing Jodie from Countdown last night about 7 o'clock and this morning a couple of occasions, she hasn't got full commitment on points A, B, and C on your list, but they are working towards that, because it's not just Countdown, it's the mall, the general business of the mall, all those business owners, but they are actively working on those, but they couldn't say they've actually got a sign off on all A, B, and C. That's the only caveat I'd put on those conditions there.
Thanks, Charles. That's all of my questions.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. I just had a quick question around mobility parking, and when we start to rather provide a park on our land and encourage private operators to provide space for mobility parking, are there any incentives that the council provides, or is there a way that we can acknowledge that some of this stuff like providing mobility parking the council can't do a lot of the time?
Yes, certainly in our district plan for new developments, there's a requirement for one mobility park per 20 parking spaces on site. And that number, just going from memory, that number increases depending. So if you've got 50 car parks, you need at least 2 mobility parks. So that's something that should be signed off at the planning stage of a new development.
Awesome. Cool.
Back to you, Councillor Condi.
All right, well, I'm just going to check in with Sean and see how he's going with accommodating a bunch of those changes into the substantive amendments.
Yes, so they should all be in there now.
Yeah.
I could email if you like, but it's just what you had before, plus Councillor Free's extra one for 7 to direct officers to continue exploring possibilities for additional residence parking in the area around Austin and Alice Street, and then changing 6 to read portfolio leads and communities after 6 months in community. So that's officers updating.
Thank you. And it also includes Councillor Wolf's change to include time limited.
Sorry, that was time limited. Yes, that change has been made as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. It's a challenge doing this in a hybrid form, and we appreciate you keeping track of everything. All right, so I will then move on to actually moving the motion. So, it's great to have a whole bunch more traffic resolutions in front of us and little bits and pieces that are being tidied up around our city. We know that actually these are things that really matter to people when they come in and request broken yellow lines or little changes around their city. It's really such an important thing for them to see it happening. So it's great to be getting more of this moving along. Thanks very much to officers who have done all the work to get these to this point, and also to them who have been liaising with me over, yesterday and today, just catching up on the last few details and putting together some amendments just so we can follow these things up. We really appreciate all of that work. And again, doing it all by text and whatnot this morning. So we thank you for that. We've got a couple of tricky ones this week. The Kurori one at Range Street is not easy. It's a complicated health and safety issue around the loading zone, where we clearly want to improve things for the pedestrians and everyone who's moving around there to make sure that they're safe. But obviously we have to prioritise our accessible parking as well. So, we're trying to make that work, and I appreciate Councillor Matthews sitting down with me and working through a way to find a way forward on that one, because officers were not keen to delay that particular change just due to the severity of the health and safety concerns around the loading zone. So I'm pleased that we've managed to kind of find a way to hopefully get that moving a bit sooner. And then I want to acknowledge the challenges around Alice Street. I can't really imagine what it would be like to have a school bus stop across your driveway, where twice a day you couldn't get in and out of your house for an hour or two. It is a real imposition on those residents and a real challenge that they face. Unfortunately, as officers have said, they've looked around for other options, and Mount Victoria was not built to contain buses driving up and down their streets. So the alternative options around there are not great, as we've heard. I really appreciate what they've done to try and find the spot on Kent Terrace, which will hopefully alleviate some of the pressure on those smaller streets like Alice and Austin Street. And hopefully, that works really well, and we'll be able to in the future extend that Kent Terrace layover space and then get even more of those buses off of the narrow streets where residents are inconvenienced. So that's the hope in the long term, but definitely acknowledging that this is, extending the hours of these bus stops so that they're able to be cleared in time for them to arrive creates a huge inconvenience for these residents. And I really appreciate staff who have already put in some more residence parking so that they don't have to wake up at 7:15 every morning and rush out in their pajamas to move their car, that they will actually have some residence parking around there. And thank you, Deputy Mayor Free, for suggesting that we could maybe follow up on providing a bit more of that. So those are really our two tricky ones today. I appreciate everybody who's been working really hard on making progress on those ones. It's always a challenge when we're trying to prioritise our road space, particularly in places like Mount Vic, where there's not a lot of it and lots of demands for it. So that's really all I want to say. And Councillor Matthews, just wondering if you wanted to second it, given the work that you've put in on those accessibility changes. Excellent.
Yes, please. I'd like to thank Councillor Condi for her creativity and, that we're sort of working our way through. This is actually I enjoy these traffic resolutions. I don't think I would ever thought I would say those words. And also officers for accommodating us, being able to sort of try and balance these competing needs and requirements from the community. The issues with Rain Street really did need to be resolved or do need to be resolved. And I had met with the union, with First Union, because supermarket workers were very concerned that they were compromising community safety because of what, the situation they were in. So, and I know very much that people were concerned in the community where they didn't want, there to be an accident or anything. So it is really good to be able to work on this, and also to still, give that signal. We're very committed to increasing the number of mobility parks and also the utility of those parks. So I really want to thank the submitters who, really helped crystallise kind of, our need to make some accommodations. So yes, thank you, everyone.
Now's the opportunity for debate. And I think Deputy Mayor Free raised her hand.
Thank you. Yes, I know that these are not easy challenges to be solved, but I know also how hard our officers do work on these and always do really good work. So I have a lot of confidence in the decisions that they've brought to us, which doesn't mean to say it's easy. But to me, asking for more residence parking to compensate for this imposition across residents' driveways and homes is an illustration actually of the parking policy work that we've been doing. And it was an easy decision for me to make because on our streets we have to use things for the highest and best purposes. And I am convinced, I've had enough discussions now today and previously with officers to realise there's some real constraints about where we can actually park. Well, it shouldn't be park, stop the buses. Things like the turning circles for the buses, the routes that they take, the whole efficiency of how they work does need to be quite a high consideration. But then it's also an easy decision to say, well, if we're making it harder for residents there, our next best priority is to actually allocate some unrestricted car parking to be particularly for residents and hopefully not too far away around the corners or somewhere quite close. And that means that other people who just come to Mount Victoria and park more casually actually get bumped down the list. And these decisions are becoming easier for us to make because we're becoming clearer and clearer about the priority we actually need to give to our roads. And likewise with mobility parking, that's quite a high priority and that needs to be reflected in our decision making as it has been with some of the decisions we're making today. So I'm finding that the framework we're working in is becoming much clearer and hopefully that does help us make the hard decisions and help us communicate to residents why we have to make the decisions we're making and how we're taking into account the best purposes for the road and the ultimate good of the most people in our city.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to address my comments in regards to Rain Street and particularly the neighbours who have given their feedback and probably through this meeting haven't been recognised. There has been a problem with Rain Street as long as I've been a councillor and with the trucks in particular, and that's in regards to not just footpath safety, but the double parking of trucks and particularly of noise. And the neighbours in Rain Street have put up with quite a lot over a significant period of time. I'm voting for this these traffic resolutions, but I do so with some reservations. And I have been assured by the officers that there will be a heightened degree of looking into the trucks' movements and their activities, which have been illegal in the past due to their consents, and also working with enforcement to see that those trucks do what they should do. But ultimately, that responsibility is on Countdown and also New World. So I hope that they're watching this YouTube because really notice has been served. They've got the parking that they required and requested, and now in good faith they need to act with the best measures as in regards to the community and also the neighbourhood, something that they have not done in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett.
Thank you, Councillor Sparrow, and sorry, just here to speak about Alice and Austin Street. Obviously, it's slightly unconventional for me to be talking about a parking issue and making it more difficult for public transport. So this is a slightly new experience for me. But look, I just want to thank Councillor Condi for her leadership and for staff for spending quite a lot of time on this. Councillors, this has been an issue for over 10 years. In fact, the former Mayor Prendergast was working on it back in the day. It's been going on that long. And I took it up, obviously, just because I am the ward councillor, but also I did think it was possibly a little bit unreasonable to block people's garages. And, you know, we have got people in our community who work shift hours. So one is a hospital worker. So, you know, it is just a little bit tricky. In saying that, of course, I believe that public transport should be safe and accessible and children should be bused into school, not being driven. And so we obviously need to make it safe. And of course, as Councillor Condi pointed out, Mount Victoria was not designed for this. It's very tricky. So the layover is good. And obviously I'll be advocating for that to be extended. In fact, I don't see why 13 to 17-year-old children can't walk a bit further. And also the additional car parking, I think, might help for those who really do need to be out of the door for good reasons. And saying that, as I spoke to you about Councillor Free yesterday, people in Mount Victoria possibly need to have a higher burden for the transport in terms of walking and cycling than people in other parts of the city, because we are so accessible to the central city. So I guess, ideally I would have liked the hours to be a bit restricted, but I get this point about the tow truck. And just the last point I was just going to ask whether we could actually, instead of just saying that the Councillor Condi and staff will talk to residents, could we just make a change so that we ask for feedback from residents? Would that be okay?
I would be fine with that with the leave of the meeting.
Thank you for that. Appreciate again all your work. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Pennant, and no doubt you'll be continuing to work on your partial solution towards the problems of parking on Mount Victoria by simple solution of halving the number of private vehicles in that neck of the woods. Look, I'd just like to thank all the officers who so much time and effort goes into some of these, which are no doubt headaches at times. So Siobhan and Charles, thank you, Sean, for all your hard work over the last while, especially this morning, and to Councillor Condi and Councillor Matthews for all your efforts towards us. So back to you, Councillor Condi, to see it through. Or actually, at this point, you have a right of reply, and then we'll vote.
Absolutely. I'm just updating Sean just to make sure that Sean's got the correct word in there from Councillor Pennant. So I think it was, instead of just adding and community, it was to say and seek feedback from community.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. For my right of reply, I would just like to agree with everything that everybody has said. I really appreciate everybody working constructively on these. These are not difficult issues. They may not be super high profile, but they're incredibly important to the people they affect, and they are challenging. So thanks to all the councillors who have worked really constructively to just find a way through what we know is going to make life inconvenient for some of our residents. So I really appreciate everybody, and let's put it to the vote.
Thank you. Carried unanimously. Right. Thank you very much, officers. Right. We're on the home straight now, hopefully. Item 2.4 on the agenda, which is proposed road closures. I'd like to invite Officer Maria Tama to the table for any questions to her.
Oh, we go. I'll stay. There you go.
I'll ask one at the outset, and that is my understanding, Maria, I discussed this with you beforehand, is that there have not been any issues with any of these particular proposals, any problems that we need to be aware of?
No. We do actually have quite a robust system around dealing with anything that comes in before and after the events.
Okay, I'm assuming there are no questions. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. Just one quick question around the Shelley Bay sealed sprint. I see in the impact report we've covered a couple of things. I was just wondering if around that area we've got little blue penguins and predator free as well, if in the impact report we consider the natural environment impacts or what sort of provisions are given to native birds and things.
Personally, I wasn't aware there were little blue penguins, but now that I know, we will definitely look at that for the events that happen in the area.
That's cool. Okay. It's only sometimes, not all the time.
Yeah, but I can still follow it up and see when it is.
So we can probably add an environmental impact section into that, so it covers off any other.
Yeah.
Anywhere else.
Okay, thank you. We have requests from the organisers of 5 different events, 1 in October, 3 in December, 1 in February, which will involve temporary road closures, and we hope none of these are impacted by any resurgence of COVID-19. They are all well-established events, and there, as we've heard, have been no problems in recent years. There have been no objections to any of them. On that basis, I move the motion being the recommendations in the officer's report. Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Free, would you like to speak?
I don't think there's any need at all.
I agree with that. Thank you. I put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Please vote.
Must be the most successful officer.
You'll know me and talk to me on the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Sean.
Thank you very much.
That has been carried unanimously. Moving on to item 2.5 on the agenda, new licences for the Onslow Cricket Club and the Newtown Festival Trust. We have, just seeing right,
Fell.
Sorry?
Fell.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yep. All right. Welcome to the table, officers. Any questions from councillors on these? Okay, I have one, and I sent this through as an email, and I have a response. Yeah, the point 23, which I'm not going to find now in time, but anyway, which is, it's a requirement for any licensee to hold a relevant public liability insurance. And we're told that the Newtown Residents Association ceased to hold public liability insurance. However, the would-be licensee is the Newtown Festival Trust. Do they hold public liability insurance? Because
Kia ora. Yes, they've assured us that they do have a public liability insurance, and we require a copy of it before we have the license signed.
Right. Oh, that's good. Okay, thank you. That clarifies that one. Right, there being no other questions on these issues, I move that we accept officers' recommendations 1 to 6, the granting of 1 new occupation licence to the Onslow Cricket Club and 1 new community garden licence to the Newtown Festival Trust. Seconder, please. Councillor O'Neill, would you like to say something? Okay, thank you. Is there any debate? Right, I put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Please vote. Thank you, carry unanimously. Thank you, officers. I hope you didn't have to wait in here too long for your short stint at the table. Thank you. And yeah, the last item on the agenda, item 2.6, the proposed road stopping land adjoining 2 and 4 Rangiora of Kaiwharawhara. Paul Davidson at the table for any questions. Thank you, Paul. Hope we haven't taken up too much of your morning.
No problem.
All right. Okay, I have a question here, and I right, yeah, I did clarify with you, and perhaps you'd just like to provide the response here for councillors about the actual this estate land. We have this interesting strip of land in the middle of this, if you've looked at the map, 101 metres long by about 2 metres wide. And is there any possibility of, this dates back a long time, and of any ancestors of the owners coming to light? I mean, the land probably doesn't have much monetary value anyway, does it? That particular strip that I'm talking about?
No, it doesn't. And for the estate land's only been looked at because of the time that's elapsed since 1904, when any action against it, any documentation has been signed, and searches in the birth, deaths and marriages have never a birth certificate or death. So the registered proprietor wasn't born in New Zealand, and there's no evidence of a live estate. So hence, if the road stopping did go ahead without anyone being able to sign any document, it would be basically landlocked, and they couldn't sign any easements.
So you expect this to be sorted out in terms of the court without any complications?
Yeah, if the committee passes the recommendations in the report, the next action would be Bell Gully would make the application to the court, and the court would have to be satisfied on the status of the estate land.
Okay, thank you. Councillor I have another question, but I'll let Councillor Condi ask hers in the meantime.
It was pretty much the same question you just asked, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you. The other one I asked you, Paul, you might just care to give an answer here, is has a price been negotiated for the disposal of the unformed legal road, and if so, for what amount?
It has been valued at step 3 of our 11-step Local Government Act process, and the price. Do you want the price?
Is it appropriate to give that information here and now?
It's a little bit academic because of the road stopping process allows for a final valuation at the end of the process for several reasons, one of which is the time elapsed since the first one and any conditions arising out of public notice. So at this point, the value is a bit academic.
Okay, we'll leave it at that point. There being no further questions, other than the one or two interesting aspects of this particular proposal, I think it's reasonably straightforward, and I move that we accept the recommendations in the officer's report. Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Wolf, do you wish to speak? Okay, on that basis, I put it to the vote. Please vote accordingly. Okay, carried unanimously. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Right, before we conclude our meeting, we will stand to read the closing Karakia. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And hopefully our next meeting will be in person too, and not by Zoom, but who knows? So the meeting is closed at 11:36.
See you guys.
Lovely. Yeah, bye. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Mel. Great sharing. Thank you, Dawn, for chasing all of those amendments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good work, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you.
And Malcolm. Yeah.
Oh, and Sean.